welcome to our podcast today. I'm so excited. We are talking 2024 debt takedown. And I am so excited to be joined by award-winning personal finance blogger, certified financial counselor, podcaster, all-around financial education champion, Tiffany Grant. Hashtag Money Talk with Tiff. We're so excited to have you with us today. Thanks for hopping on.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited about this conversation.
Yeah, so we are seeing record debt levels. I know a lot of people are feeling that in their pocketbooks with financial stress growing. And especially December really seems to bring about a lot of emotions in a lot of areas. So I know this is top of mind for a lot of people. 2023 really saw us going through inflation challenges, right? So the rising price of goods is impacting everybody's wallet. I know Christmas shopping and holiday shopping this year has been stressful for a lot of the people that we're talking to, our clients, my friends and family. So the conversation we're having today isn't just theory, it is happening in people's lives. We're experiencing it. So Tiffany, what are you seeing? I know you talk to a lot of people, you're out and about. So
Absolutely. So, like you said, inflation has been hitting us hard, but I kind of expected us to have inflation just because of all the stuff that happened during COVID. The
mhm,
government was pretty much handing out money. And so, of course, when there's more supply,
mhm,
there's going to be more demand. And so that raises prices. So I knew that inflation was going to come. I just didn't know to what extent. So that's one factor. The other factor is the Federal Reserve had raised interest rates quite a bit since COVID, and that was to stifle down the inflation. And so, I always say they have one of the hardest jobs
I guess,
because
I guess.
trying to figure out how much to raise, how much to lower, it's a lot of work. But luckily, there was a report that came out that said that they're not going to raise any more. They may actually go down in 2024. Now, this is all speculation. Nobody knows what they're thinking. We also can't see into the future, but that was the report. So, we have inflation, we have rising interest rates, and then we have the student loan unpause, right? So that happened in October. And I just saw a report this morning as well. Y'all probably like, Tiffany, you just read too much, but and they were saying that the Department of Education reported that 9 million student loan borrowers that were due for payments did not pay as of the middle of November. And so that's 40% of student loan borrowers did not pay their student loan payments when they came due. Now, they're not taking action on any of that because they knew that it was going to happen, but that just goes to show how many people are struggling with debt right now. Also, I want to add another thing that has taken off is like the buy now, pay later. So
Everywhere.
Affirm, Klarna, all of these different companies are getting in the game Afterpay, and a lot of people are taking advantage of it. Now, it may sound good at in the beginning, but I've worked with clients where they've had 30 different, buy
Yes.
now, pay later things, $5 here, $20 there, and it adds up really quickly. So that's another thing that's been happening this year. And I'll say since COVID, all of these things have kind of compounded and got us in the situation we are now.
Yes, good summary. The buy now, pay later really impact people's budgets, right? It kind of throws off our traditional eye of spending plans and budgeting. It's hard to keep up with. So that's a whole new challenge that people are facing, right? With the growth of fintech and these new options. So
And
good
then
call out on that one.
yeah, no problem. And I also forgot credit card debt. Like a lot
Oh,
of people have been
that
coming
one.
to me,
Yes.
yes, with a ton of credit card debt. And I'm talking big numbers. I think one client that actually sent you all's way, she had like 100,000 in credit card debt. And
Oh,
so where people are spending a lot on credit cards. And so, when you think about it, inflation is based on supply. Well, if people are dipping into credit cards and they're really not able to afford these things, it keeps getting inflation to rise. And then the basic things become harder to purchase, like food. So I just wanted to throw that out there too. Credit card debt is huge.
well said. And all of these things you're talking about, the inflation, the credit card debt, managing all of these kind of new tools that we have, they have not just an impact on our finances, on the money, the numbers, but also on our mental health. There's such an emotional toll that takes. I know that the people I've been talking to, our clients, the financial stress levels are just growing and growing and growing, right? And we hear all the time, I'm having trouble sleeping, it's impacting my relationships. And so I know that you're having those same conversations, but what emotional factors are you seeing?
I mean, same here. Debt is very stressful because you're having to pay someone every month that, you think about what could that money be doing? Like, what else can it be doing? Like, it could be in a savings, it could be in investments, it could be getting these necessities that I need. And so it really affects your mental. As someone, like, for instance, I'm still in debt. And I had a goal to be debt free by 30. I didn't make it. I'm 32 now. But I was like, you know what, Tiffany, it's okay. But I was really down about that because I'm like, I'm sick of debt. I don't want to be in debt anymore. It does take a toll. And this is speaking from someone that's in it, right? And I
Mhm.
know better, And it also affects your relationships because a lot of people are ashamed of the type of debt that they have
Right,
as well. So there's also that factor. There's the factor of, maybe there's a situation, people are in a romantic relationship and they're ashamed of their debt, or their partner's like, oh my gosh, like, it has a shock
right,
factor. And so I get a lot of couples that come to me because one person has a lot of debt, the other person has been like a super saver, what have you. And so now they're bumping heads because they have a difference in opinion. And so money is very emotional. And it controls a lot of what's around us, from relationships to mental health to stress. All of these different things really mostly stem from money, honestly.
right. I was just reading the newest PwC employee wellness survey a couple of days ago, and they said 60% of people rank finances as the number one cause of stress, right? And that's higher than even pre-pandemic or during pandemic levels. So, you know, and then we think about it just as finances, but like you said, it creeps into all those other places in our lives and really has an impact across the board. That survey particularly was talking about the impact it has on our productivity, our, being distracted at work.
Mhm.
And so it creeps into every space. And I think oftentimes we want to talk about finances as just numbers, but it's important to find that connection. Like, what does that really mean? And how does that impact all pieces of our lives?
Absolutely. And also, let's not forget self esteem. Like, a lot of people
Yes.
that come to me, they're like, oh my God, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Some people are boohoo crying. And it really affects that version of themselves as well. They can't fully be themselves because they have this in the back of their mind.
Yeah. And I think we base some of our value on it, but let's be honest, none of us really get a formal education in personal finance, right? If you're lucky enough to be in one of the 5 or 6 states that require it, great. But most of us just learn from the people around us, and that's not always the best lessons, right? So,
Absolutely not. And honestly, that's why I got started in this, because the people that were around me, they went through bankruptcies and foreclosures. And so I was like, this is not what I want for my
yes,
life. And so that's why I started learning more about money. But, I had to make that conscious decision to do so. I could have took the other route and said, I'm gonna just do what everybody else does. I like buying stuff too, that type of thing.
yeah, the peer pressure is strong.
Yeah, yeah. And that also gets into another conversation about financial trauma, which we don't have to get into today, but that stems from trauma. Like, I didn't want to get a credit card for a long time because I saw what it did. And some people, when you're not able to pay for your necessities, that's a form of financial trauma too. It makes you feel a lot different than if things were, as you wanted them to be.
Listened to a really great podcast the other day on financial trauma, and it had me reflecting a lot on myself and my financial trauma and how that really, again, reaches into all parts of my life, right? Like, I can be a bit of a control freak. But it's because there were so many pieces, especially money, that I couldn't control growing up. And so it's interesting how much of an impact finances have on our lives. So now, okay, let's shift and let's kind of set the stage for 2024, right? Let's talk about what we see happening. So obviously, like I said, we're reaching record debt levels. So in Q3 of this year, we're over $1 trillion in consumer debt. That's only the second time that this has happened since they started recording it in 1999. So the debt levels are rising. It's interesting because during the pandemic, we actually saw debt levels start to go down, right? And we know where some of that came from, right? We got some money from the government. We had some influx there. But at the same time, overwhelming job loss or pauses in work. And so I think we're seeing that lag effect and that really starting to impact people's spending now, which again is going to continue to cause that financial stress. And we're going to keep seeing that. So when we think about this growing debt, how it's impacting people, I know you and I working one-on-one with people, we often start with the goal setting. So what's the importance of goal setting? How do you kind of go about that when you're talking to folks?
You have to know where you're going in order to get there. So that's one of our first conversations. Actually, like when we're in doing a consultation, before we even become clients, I ask them what are their top three goals. Now, of course, we tweak it. If they become clients, we may have to tweak it, do some massaging or what have you. But having just some idea of where you want to go is really helpful in creating your plan and also nailing down your budget, which we'll get to later. But when you're thinking about your goals, think about what you want. A lot of people come to me and they base their goals on society or friends or what their parents would want them to do or what have you. But honestly, your money is your money. And I had to learn that a few years ago. I took my family with me to buy a car. And I didn't need a brand new off the lot car. I didn't really want a brand new off the lot car, but my family was there and they were like, well, Tiffany, just get what you're going to get. And so that became the thing. And I actually ended up driving off the lot with a car. Now, a couple of years later, I sold it because I was like, that was stupid. And but I say that to say, make sure your goals are your goals. Also thinking about where you are financially and making those goals realistic. So I know most people have heard of the SMART acronym: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time constraint. If you make sure that your goals hit all of those 5 areas, you'll be more apt to stick to them and also succeed. And so that's one thing that I really encourage people to really just sit down and think about it. Like you could say, oh, I want to buy a house. Okay. You know, how
Next.
much does that house cost? Do some research ahead of time, see how much it costs, see what payment you can afford. Put that all in your goal. What time frame do you want to do this in? Like, is it 1 year or is it 5 years? Because that might look a lot different in your financial plan. So look at all of those things and make sure that you really think out these goals, because those are going to be your guiding light as you go through this process. I have people do some really high overarching goals. So this is ideally what I want to happen. And then we break that down into kind of like baby steps. So smaller goals. And then that'll help us get there as well. If you are able to check off a goal, it helps your motivation and it helps you stick to it. So it's always good to take those big goals and break it down into smaller goals too.
Love it. Yes. Yes. I love a list and I love when I get to highlight the thing that I've done, right? That is just very satisfying. So
Mhm.
something about it just really works for us as human beings.
Yes. And I'll also say if you're paying off debt, because that's why we're here, right? When you
Yeah.
start getting those paid in full letters in the mail, OMG, it is such an
Oh, good.
awesome feeling. It's an awesome feeling. So break those big goals down into smaller goals so you're more apt to stick to it.
We do an activity of like, what's the why behind your goals, right? Because saying, I want to pay down debt, great. Yes. Like, let's pay down debt. But then why? What's the why behind that, right? So that you can have space to save for a home. So I think really diving into the why behind the goals is such an important piece of that as well.
Yes. And I'm
Yeah.
glad you mentioned that. If you ask yourself why 5 times, at least, you'll get to the real root of what you're going for.
Okay.
So that's one thing that I do practice in my personal life too. Like when I'm looking at my big overarching goals of what I want to do with my life, I'm like, okay, why? And then
Yeah.
I answer, and then I say, okay, why? And I do that at least 5 times.
Yeah,
And that gets to
100%.
the heart of it.
Let's dive a little like deeper into debt reduction and how those personal finance goals align with debt reduction.
Yeah. So a lot of people come to me because they're like, oh, I want to be debt free. Right. And so, first and foremost, we have to figure out what that is. So,
Mm.
I always encourage people to pull out all, like, I know it's scary, but pull out all your debt, like, pull out all those
Yes,
statements,
yes.
see how much you really owe, because we need to get a number behind that. Because if you have, let's say, $3,000, that's going to look different than $20,000 and so on and so forth. So, really, before you even set that goal, you need to figure out where you are.
Mhm.
Then once you do that and lay it all out, I always tell people to make sure you lay it out by amount. So make sure you have the amount, the interest rate, and the due date of all your payments and the minimum payment. So those are the 4 things that you really need to make sure that you structure a good plan. Um, Once you do that, you can start thinking about what order you want to pay these things in. And so I say 3 different ways you can pay down debt. There's the debt snowball, which that is when you take the lowest amount. So you're going off of the amount, you take the lowest amount and you pay that one off, and then you roll that payment into the next one, and so on and so forth. The other one is the debt avalanche, which looks at your interest rates. And so you take the highest interest rate debt and you pay it off, and then you take that, roll it, roll it, roll it. And then the third one, which I usually do with my clients, which most people don't, is doing is doing a combination of the two. So depending on how the debt is structured, sometimes it might be more beneficial if you pay off the high interest rate, or it might be more beneficial if you do the snowball. Or maybe we start with the snowball and get some momentum, get some confidence going, and then we switch to the avalanche. And so I always say, you have to do what works for you. And depending on the person, like if somebody comes to me and they're not motivated at all, we're going to start with the snowball because that'll give us some motivation. But if somebody comes to me and they're super motivated and they're like, I want to get this done and I know I can do it, then we might start with the avalanche and maybe go into the snowball when we get to the student loans. So, like,
Yeah.
you kind of have to look at it. And that's why we're here to help you, and see what the best payment option is for you. One that keeps you motivated, but also one that saves you the most money as well.
Yes, love that, right? There is no like one size fits all, and there's
Mhm.
not just one answer. So that's why I think it's great that people like you and people like Apprisen exist, because just having that ability to um, brainstorm and come up with that kind of unique solution that works best for that person. So yeah, so okay, love that, love those strategies. And then when we think about like the folks that you're talking to, I know we see it every day of just the stress that people are undergoing and the mental health impacts, but let's talk about kind of as people are paying down debt, what positives do we see for their mental well-being, right? As we're as we're growing through that. And that can also kind of help us touch on what are some of those real mental well-being impacts of debt.
Yeah. So first and foremost, as someone that has started paying off debt and getting those paid in full letters, it makes you walk a little different. Like you get
Yeah.
more confidence, right? You really start getting more, yeah, chest up, shoulders back. But you start getting more confidence, honestly. And I see that with my clients as well. There's some clients that are now debt free. And first of all, I'm like, you beat me, but I'm so happy for them. But when they become debt free, they start making different decisions with their money. Or as they're going through this process, they start making different decisions with their money. Like, for instance, I have clients where they'll pay down one debt and they're like, oh, that feels good. That was great. And I always make time for us to pause when that happens and just feel the moment, Like a lot of times we do stuff and we just keep going and we don't actually feel our emotions as we're going through that process. And so just taking that moment to pause and say, how do I feel right now? How does this feel? Do I like this feeling? That type of thing will make it easier for you to stick to it as well. But with the clients, as they're paying down debt, they might say, well, I paid that one off in 3 months. I wonder if I can do this one in two. And
Yeah,
so,
a little
it kind
challenge.
right.
Yeah.
I noticed that people start challenging themselves too. When they first thought it wasn't possible, now everything's possible. When they were looking at their debt, they were like, oh my gosh, 50,000, how am I going to get through this? And then as they start getting down to 40 and 30, they're like, oh, like this is not as bad as I thought it was. And so, there's so much that happens psychologically and mentally. I've seen relationships get repaired because people were paying down debt. When they come to me, the couples are like, button heads. But by the time we start paying things off and we see a little progress, it's like, oh, babe, I love you.
Oh,
That makes you overall feel good. I mean,
yeah.
imagine if you're under so much stress, then everything around you, like we said before, is going to suffer. And
Yeah.
so as that stress starts getting relieved, your health might get better. I've had clients where that happened, where their health got better, their physical health, their mental health. This is so many things attached to this, but you do start seeing positive results and changes once you start making it happen.
Yeah, having a plan for it starts to relieve that. You sleep
Mhm.
better. We all know when you sleep better, the next day you're happier, you work better, your health improves. So it has such far-reaching impacts, and I love seeing that. I love to see that progress. So
For
that's what we
sure.
do.
And you know what? It may not be as bad as they think it is.
Right.
And that's also another thing too, if we don't know, the sky is falling. But once
Right.
we once we
Yeah.
start getting our eyes on it, it's like, oh, it's not as bad as I thought.
Exactly.
So taking up that mental space, just thinking about it, what you think it is, has a detrimental effect too.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the impacts, the positives of paying down debt, and you've laid out some of the strategies that you use with your clients. But um, beyond that, what are top strategies for tackling debt in the new year?
Yeah. So first and foremost, like we said before, you got to get your emotions under control, and really just start looking at the numbers. Right. That's going to be your first step. Second step is setting those goals. And to do that, you have to have everything in front of you. You have to know your full picture. Otherwise, one thing that could happen is that you set a goal, but that goal will mess up other things. And so I tell
Mhm.
people look at your holistic picture and see what that looks like. So, to give you an example, maybe someone doesn't have any savings, but debt is their priority. Well, if you think about it, if you don't have any savings and something comes up, then you're going to be adding more debt. So we might have to switch those priorities around temporarily so that we don't get into more debt. So look at your whole picture, see where you are. So when we're looking at the debt piece, you want to make sure, which I stated before, but I'll go do it again. You want to make sure that you have the due dates, the interest rates, the amount, and the minimum payments. And the reason you want to have all that information is because when you're thinking about strategy, all of those things play a role.
Mhm.
So for instance, if you decide you want to do the debt snowball, right? You need to know the minimum payments because if you're working on this debt snowball, you're only paying the minimum payments on the debts that you're not working on at that moment. And so with that, you're supposed to work on one debt at a time. And so you start with the one that's the least amount. You start on that one, everything else you're doing minimum payments. And then you once that's paid off, you snowball it into the next one, that same payment. So this is another way that people get kind of off track. Once they
Uh-huh.
pay off a debt, they're like, oh I have extra money. Well,
Yeah.
no, you're supposed to roll that into the next one. And so that same amount that you've been paying, you've already accounted for in your budget. You've already made your life around it. You might as well just roll it into the next thing. I tell people short-term sacrifice for long-term gain.
Mm,
There's going to be
okay.
times where you have to make those sacrifices, but it also opens up a world of opportunities. If you put all of your debt together and in just the minimum payments, look at how much you're spending every month that you'll never get back. And it's not going towards anything. Like it's not going towards your savings, it's not going towards investments. So it's not growing. It's just going out to people that you owe. And let's say, for instance, you have student loans. Student loans have some of the lowest interest rates as far as debt is concerned, right? But let's say you're like, oh, I want to do the snowball method. Well, if you have, let's say, a low amount on your student loan, you'll be paying that off first. But is that really beneficial for you? Because a lot of times with student loan payments, and this might be some good tea for someone, um, you
Sell it.
can, right, you can negotiate with the student loan servicers. So, for instance, if you can't afford it, just contact them. They have so many different payment plans and options. And honestly, that's one of the least important ones, in my opinion, just because there's so many different options for you. So, even though it may be first in your debt snowball plan, it may not be the best option. And so that's why I say sometimes, you have to kind of go between the two, depending on the situation. Credit card debt's probably going to be your highest interest rates. Sometimes the highest amounts. And so you kind of want to consider that. Cars are kind of up there now. So if you bought a
Yeah.
car since COVID, um, the interest rates are out of this world. The payments are out of this world. So you kind of have to weigh that in. Mortgage is also, to me, a low priority, but for some people, they want to get it paid off. But really consider how these things affect your cash flow. So that's your month to month, how much money you have, and then also your long-term interest, how much you're paying. So think about all these things as you're figuring out which strategy you want to do. Now, I know it sounds like a lot, but I promise once you start getting into the numbers and you start thinking about these things a little more in depth, it becomes a little easier. And then of course, you have people like us that can help you kind of sort through that too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's good to have a partner in this journey
Mhm.
because like you said, there are a lot of different factors that come into play when you're making that debt reduction strategy. Um, and it's got to be based on your unique situation, which you mentioned cash flow and you mentioned fitting things into your budget, and we haven't really dived into that. So the real importance of having a spending plan, budgeting, reviewing that on a regular basis. Like, tell me a little bit about your budgeting philosophies.
So first and foremost, I love budgeting. That is like my baby. And the reason, and this might go back to the financial trauma piece we talked about before, right? So I like having control over my money. I like being able to tell it what to do, where to go. At any given time, I know exactly what my money's doing. And I do that because I have a budget. I do that because I have a spending plan. Those are the same things, by the way. It's
Yeah,
just some people think budgeting is triggering, which I get. It's
it's a
like
bad
dieting,
word now. Yeah.
right? It's like dieting. So whatever you want to call it, it kind of has the same thing. And so for me, it's super comforting. It calms my anxiety
Mhm.
because whenever I get off of budgeting and I'm like, oh my gosh, can I spend this? Do I have enough money for this? Like, that
Yeah.
type of thing. I can always go back and say, oh, you got it. It's not that bad. And
It's right
so
there.
right. So it gives you that comfort and it gives you that predictability
Yeah.
when it comes to spending. And so I love budgeting. And I tell people when you think about budgeting, don't think about it as a restriction. That's usually how most people approach it. They're like, oh my gosh, you're saying I have to do a budget. That means I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't do this. But how I look at it is giving you permission to do the things that you want to do. And so to give you an example, because I love examples, I am not a big spender on clothes. Like everything I wear is thrift store. I'm not a fashionista. I mean, I look pretty decent today, but I'm not a fashionista. And so clothing really does not have a high priority in my budget. Now, one day I had some shoes and they were talking, they were starting to
Yep,
come
yep.
apart. And I said, oh, I have to buy some shoes. And
Um,
so I was like, oh my gosh, like these shoes are going to throw off my debt payment. I'm not going to be debt free by 30 anymore because this was back then. I'm not going to be debt free by 30 anymore. It's just going to throw everything off. I'm not going to have enough for it, blah, blah, blah. And so it was like the sky was falling because I needed
spiral. Yeah, the
shoes, right?
spiral. Yep.
And so I something said, Tiffany, go look at your budget. And lo and behold, I had a clothing line item that I account for every single month, $30.
Yeah.
Not much because I don't spend, but it was there and it was there ready for me to spend it. And so that's when it clicked for me. And that's what I go through with my clients is changing that mindset that it's not restricting you, it's giving you permission to do the things that you want and need to do. So if I have clients and they're like, oh, I love to travel. Okay, let's put in the budget. Or,
Yes.
oh, I want to pay off my debt. Okay, let's put in the budget. Oh, I want this PS5. I actually had a client like that. Well, let's just put it in the
Your
budget.
budget. Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to tell you, no, you can't do
Yeah.
this because it's your money and that's what you want it for.
That's right.
Now, what we do have to figure out is where's it going to come from?
Yeah.
So I had a client where she loved TV. And so, first, all the financial gurus, they're like, oh, cut cable. You don't need cable,
Number
blah,
one.
blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm not getting rid of my cable. Like that was her very first conversation with me. I'm not getting rid of it. And I said, that's fine. But where are we going to pull it from? So is it going to come from our travel line item or is it going to come from our eating out restaurants line item? It has to come from somewhere. So that's more of what I teach my clients is, everything has a give and take. Our income is a bucket, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you feel like, well, I can't get rid of anything else, like this is the bare bottom, then maybe we need to look at income. Maybe
Yes.
that's part of the issue. So maybe we need to look at that to start funding some of these things that we want to do, but it has to come from somewhere. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the mindset shift and approach that we take when we look at budgeting is that A, it's not a restriction, it's giving me permission. B, I can budget for whatever it is I want, whether it's massages, nails, hair, whatever it is, clothes, it can all go in there. And then as long as it comes from a place in the budget. So if you go over in massages, then it has to come from something else. So
Yes.
once you get those principles down, it really becomes easier to stick to. And much like dieting, if you say, "Oh, I'm going to diet," you're not gonna stick to it. As soon as you see a piece of cake, you're gonna be like, "Ooh, cake." Um,
Yeah.
But if you put cake into your diet,
Right.
then you're not going to miss it. Right. And so that's why I tell people make sure you have those things that you enjoy in there because that'll help you out as well. And also, one more thing always have fun money. So, or blow money. I call it two different things fun money or blow money. And that is just a line item. Like if you're in the store or something, stick $50, $100 or whatever in there. And if you're in the store, you're like, oh, I really want this, but you didn't account for it anywhere else. Guess what? You have this bucket of money that's ready and waiting for you to pull from.
Love it.
Um, so always
Yeah.
have a blow or fun money line item because that will also help you stick to it. So I can go on and on about budgeting.
No, I love that. I think that piece, that fun money piece is so important because I think that is where a lot of our like guilt comes from with spending is those things we don't account for, which are always going to be a part of our spending, right? There's just no way around it.
Well, put a caveat out there though,
Okay.
because I have had clients where their fun money, blow money was like $500. And I'm like, wait a minute, we got to see where this money is going. Like, we
Right,
still have
right.
to account for it. And if that does happen, then we start building out some of the other line items
Yes.
that it's supposed to go under.
Yeah.
So I tell people, okay, this is another tip. A budget is a living, breathing document. So
Mm,
it can change daily, it can change weekly. Like tweak it as you go. So that way you can see, kind of where things need to change, whether you need to spend more somewhere, less somewhere, so on and so forth. So that's one caveat with the blow money. Let's not get over the top.
Right, right. When we talk about it, we always say, this is not just like math here. This is a reflection of your values, right?
Mhm.
This is yours.
If you show me your budget, I can show you where your values are,
That's
to
it.
your point.
That's it.
Like, I can see what you like to spend on, whether it's your kids, whether it's gift for family, whether it's vacation, like all of these things will show up in your budget once you get it down. So, I think that's wonderful advice.
Yeah. Awesome. So you've mentioned a couple times that you are still on your debt repayment journey. And so how do you balance debt repayment and mental health? And what kind of stress reduction techniques do you use in that space?
Budgeting really helps, because that helps me stay on track. That helps me make sure that I'm doing what I need to do and that my money's going where I want it to go. I also do affirmations. I'm very woo woo. Woo woo. I had an affirmation on my board in my office where it would say, I release myself from anything that prevented me from achieving prosperity. You
Good.
know, there might be things like abundance is all around me. And so there's so many different money affirmations you can use, but saying those things continuously and on a daily basis, it really changes your mindset. So you go from thinking, and especially if you're in a rut, like I get in a rut sometimes, thinking about my debt, thinking about all these different things that I have to pay for because I don't like spending. Um, and when I do that, I go back to my affirmations. I'm like, oh, but abundance is all around me, or money is my friend, or whatever it is that you need to work through, whatever traumas you have. Those are really helpful. I also like meditation. So I do meditations pretty much every morning, whether it's for just peace throughout the day or stress relief or what have you. That's something that I also do. I will also say keeping track of my goals is really soothing for me as well. And so every month I do a check in on like my net worth and where my debt is and where my savings is, investing, all of those things. And I account for all of that in my budget. So saving, investing, and debt payoff. Because if I didn't, I would feel bad about not investing, or I would feel bad about not saving anything. And so all of those things do make it to my budget, even though debt payoff is the most important thing to me. Um, might be minimal amounts, but it does make me feel better that, oh, I do have money going off to do this and do that or what have you. So, um, all of that to say, you just have to find what works for you. I know also technology works for me. I love technology and I use a lot of apps, fintech. I've tried a lot. And that also helps me keep my mental because I'm really all over the place, y'all, in real life. And so
We all are. Some of us just have.
I am all over the place. So lists, I love a good checklist. I love apps that, manage my calendar for me. All these different things really make my life easier. I use a debt app. I use a budget app. Like,
Yep.
there's a lot of different technology. So that also helps my mental as well, because I can free up that space to think about something else.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that's a great segue to my next question. So you're just reading my mind here. Um, Thinking about there's been such a growth in fintech and all of the apps and tools and resources that we have access to now. So tell me a little bit about some of your favorites, some of those useful apps that you're using for not just your finances, but for your mental.
Yes, yes. So, debt payoff planner, I've been using that since the beginning of my debt payoff journey. And what I like about it is that you can see all your debts. When you update it, you can see that things are paid off and it keeps your original total. And so that's how I figured out that I paid off over 50,000 in debt in like 2 years,
Okay.
is
Yeah.
because I kept track of it through that app. And that was really helpful. So that's one. Two, I'm currently for budgeting using YNAB. So you need a budget. I absolutely love it for so many reasons. But one of the main reasons I love it is because it's not like your typical budget app where, you make this pie in the sky budget and then you're just updating the numbers as you go. And oops, I overspent here. Oops, I didn't know that I was already at my budget for this. Well, with YNAB, you can't spend it unless it's funded, and you can't fund it unless the money's actually in your account. And so you make the pie in the sky, but then when it comes to spending, unless it's funded, you really don't have it. And so really I use YNAB as to check my balance. Like I don't even look in my bank account anymore, just to do my
Okay. Yeah.
reconciliation.
Yeah.
What's more accurate is YNAB because I can say, oh, that money's already accounted for here. So I really don't have it, even though it's showing in my account.
Love it.
And so, yeah, so I love YNAB for that reason. And also, you can make as many budgets as you want. And so, because I'm a business owner and they don't charge you extra. So, because I'm a business owner, I have my personal and my business budget in there and I don't have to pay extra. So, I love that. I have for years used Every Dollar though. Every Dollar is Dave Ramsey's version, but I love it because it's a zero-based budget as well. It just doesn't have the funded capabilities and things like that. But it's a really good budgeting app, and I use that for years too. So just for life management, I use Motion app. It's semi new, but it's like an AI calendar management system. And so I put tasks in there. So maybe it's like meeting with this client or making sure I have a plan ready for this client. And you can put the priority, you can put when it's due, you can put if it's a loose due date or a hard due date, all of these different things. And it automatically puts things on your calendar. And so someone told me a while ago, they were like, if something's important to you, schedule it, right? Not putting it on a to-do list because those rarely get done, but actually putting it on your calendar and making time for it. And so that's what I love about Motion. And that just helps me in my everyday life. I'm a single mom with 3 kids. And so it's a lot to keep up with at times.
Yeah. You've got a full calendar, I think.
Right. So I love that it connects to my calendar and then it also moves things around. So if I have a meeting that pops up, it'll move my tasks around and make sure that nothing gets missed. So I really like that. So, and if you want affirmations, there's a app called I Am, which I really enjoy, and that gives you affirmations every day for free. And then they of course they have a paid version, but the
Yeah.
free version gives you plenty of affirmations, and you can put widgets on your phone so they can be front and center. There's also one called Motivation made by the same people, and that gives you quotes. And so I have that one on my phone as well. So there's a lot of little different things that I use.
I love I am. I love getting my affirmations in the morning.
And
And
throughout the day.
exactly. Yeah. And I will be downloading Motion soon. So thank you, Tiffany.
My pleasure.
I love all the apps. But as I'm thinking about it, I think like sometimes it can get overwhelming to have so many tools, right? So how do you think about kind of the expanding technology and its role in, enhancing financial education? Like, what's the balance there, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question because as someone that loves tech, there's a lot out there and I could see how it could become very overwhelming for people. Um, I think the best thing is to find out what works for you. So first and foremost, you have to figure out where do you need technology to help? Because a lot of people just jump into tech. They're like, oh, this looks cool. Let me try this, but not understanding where in their process it fits, whether it's their life process or work process, whatever. And
Mhm.
so figuring out where technology can augment or help out in different things is really helpful. So, like for instance, with budgeting, I'm like, okay, I know I need something that's on the go because I'm always on the go. I'm not going to be by a spreadsheet all the time. And I
Right.
need something that I can put in, while I'm pumping my gas, I can put in how much I spent. And so I knew I needed an app for that. And so you kind of have to look at how your life works and what processes technology would augment, and then try to find something. And I always go off of reviews.
Yep,
I'm a
yep.
firm believer in checking out the reviews. I usually look at the most helpful, the positive ones, and I also look at the negative ones just to see what people are saying. And then, I mean, honestly, you don't know unless you try it. So you just got to try different things and see what fits. Like I have some clients where they love YNAB like me, but I have some clients where they're like, YNAB is too much. Like it's too overwhelming because it does have a little learning curve. And so I'm
Okay.
like, okay, well, let's try every dollar. Let's see if that works. Or
Right.
let's try something else, you know? So you have to keep trying things until you find something that fits for you. Now, once you find that thing, it's a wonderful feeling, but it
Yeah.
does take a lot of kissing of the frogs to figure it out.
It is. It's like a whole dating strategy for these apps these days.
Yeah, and it's a gift and a curse. I'm glad that they're out there, and I'm grateful that fintech has blown up the way it has, and stuff is continuously being put out there. But it does become overwhelming for the end consumer because it's so many different choices, you
Yeah.
know?
All the tools and resources are great, the access to information. But that's it. Sometimes you just have to budget a little more time into the research process there. But that can be a great thing to do, right? Beginning of the year, as we think about, I mean, I like to reset on a more regular basis, but there is always a lot of positive energy and momentum for reflection, for change, for goal setting that happens here in this, in the beginning of the year. So this can be a
Mhm.
good time to embrace that positive energy and put it towards kind of finding the things that are going to work for you in 2024, right? And enhance your money, your life throughout the year. So,
For sure. And I mean, let's be real. December, that's when people are looking back at the year. First of all, they're like, how did we get here? But then,
mhm,
second of all, they're like, what happened? Like, the beginning of the year is perfect because, you just wrapped up a year. You saw what you did, what you didn't do. If you're not recapping, I highly suggest doing that. Just looking back at your year and see what happened. And then, like you said, January, February, that's when people are really gung ho on, what we need to get done.
sure. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit. We've talked a lot about the debt repayment strategies. But one thing I see is that life happens and there are oftentimes bumps in the road as we're on this debt repayment journey, right? And so um, how do we keep the momentum? How do we adjust when things like a job loss or unexpected medical expenses, like how do we adjust to life changing as we know it will?
Yeah, so change is inevitable, right? It happens all the time. We can have the best plan ever laid out, perfect. I mean, look at me. I went to be debt free by 30. I was on track, and then life happened. And so it happens all the time, regardless of how much you plan. But don't jump off a cliff. A lot of times when things happen, we're like, oh my gosh, this is just going to get us all off track. We start having that, I call it negative autopilot, where we're
Mhm.
like, oh, this didn't go right. So now everything's not going right, you know?
Yep, yep.
Which is why it's important to have a positive mindset when you wake up doing your affirmations and stuff. But anyway, um, you start getting into negative autopilot. But I always tell people, regardless of where you are or regardless of what happens, there's always a way out of it. Always. And so having that mindset and getting that mindset down packed will really help you start thinking about solutions, right? Because if we're in a mindset where we're like, oh my gosh, everything's so horrible, maybe you're like, I don't see my way out of this, what have you, then you can't really activate that creative side of your brain where you can start thinking about solutions. It'll continue to be in the fight or flight. And that's where we want to stay out of. And so kind of even if something that you didn't plan for comes up, make sure that even though it may seem really horrible, try to keep that positive mindset because it'll help you be creative with your solutions. So okay, now when we think about that, right, all we have to do is adjust.
Mm.
That's it. We
I
just
like how you
adjust our
said that.
plan.
All we have to do is adjust. You're
Yeah.
calm. Calm.
That's it. At the end of the day, life is going to happen, and really honestly on a daily basis, we're just taking life as it comes, really.
Yep.
And so keep that same mindset when it comes to your finances. Have a plan in place, but be prepared to pivot and, not feel horrible about pivoting when that time comes. And I say when, not if, because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So just make sure that you're not so dead set on your plans. I think that happened to me as well, where I was just so dead set on debt free by 30. When I turned 30, I said, okay, I have another 11 months before I turn 31. So let me see if I can do it. And then I didn't do it. And I was so hard on myself because I was like, I built my whole entire business around this premise that I'm gonna be debt free by 30 and this, that, and the other. And people are probably looking at me like, really, Tiffany? Like, you didn't make it. But the reality of the situation was nobody cared. People were still getting that information and they didn't care that I didn't make it by 30. And when I changed it to 35, nobody even noticed. And so I say that to say a lot of times we think things are bigger than what they are. When we're in the moment. But when you zoom out later on, or when you look at it later on, and be like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was when I was going through it. And so just think about that as you're going through this process. Life will happen, things will change. I've gone through a marriage and a divorce, since that. And so that really got me off track as well. And so things will change and you just have to pivot and go with the flow. And luckily, everything that we've been talking about today is changeable. So
Yeah, that's well said.
nothing is
Yeah.
set in stone. So
Yeah. That's not to say that you have to be happy all the time, but to be able to bring yourself back to a positive mindset is really important. And so using those tools, like Tiffany said, the affirmations, the meditation, the things that work for you to create that resilience in your mind. And I also love how you were able to adjust your goal there, right? Because we often get attached to the outcome when really we should be focused on the process, right? So
mhm.
having a goal is great, but don't get too attached to the outcome. It's the journey, it's the process, it's the habits that we build along the way, the connections we create along the way that are what is really important. So thank you
Yes.
out there for us.
Yeah. And thank you for putting out being positive all the time, because I think that's really important to highlight as well. Um, at the end of the day, you're going to have feelings, you're going to have emotions. And I tell my clients, feel them. Like, don't be afraid of feeling those emotions because they're necessary for a few reasons. One, once you feel the emotion, you can get it out the way.
Yep.
Right. If you don't feel it, then it's going to be really hard to move past it. And, we realize this with grief, for instance. Like, a lot of times when we lose someone that's really close to us, we put the emotions behind us, we keep going with life, but then eventually it sneaks back up, because you haven't really dealt with it. And so I'm glad that you brought that up because that's super important. And I feel like what's most important is the recovery. So after you felt the emotion, maybe even get a therapist. I'm all for therapy, with whatever that is. And also, really quick with that, just a quick tip. If you do work for someone, usually they have EAPs. So definitely check that out. If you don't know what that is, go ask your HR person. They probably have it. But you can get free counseling. And so think about that as well. Start thinking about, how can I feel this emotion, get through this emotion, and then start stepping into, the solutions. How can we get past this?
On that note, as we talk about, reaching out when you are feeling like you need help, I think there's a lot of kind of fear or hesitation to reach out when you're struggling financially and or you don't know who to reach out to. And so um, I think it's really important that um, people like you and I are having the conversation, are putting it out there and are available. But what are some of the benefits of reaching out for help? And then talk to me a little bit about the role that you see credit counseling agencies like Apprisen playing in our local communities.
Yes, great questions. Okay, so when I'm explaining to potential clients what I do, right, I equate it to a personal trainer because you know how to do sit ups, you know how to do jumping jacks, just like how much
Yep.
money you have and what you're spending, whatever. But the reason you hire a personal trainer is because you need the right technique and you need accountability. And so that's kind of how I equate reaching out for help, right? Like it's not something to be ashamed about. It's just a way for you to get to your goals faster, in my opinion. Because these are people that have seen everything, for the most part. Sometimes I get surprised, but right. But they've seen most things. And so regardless of what you're coming with, they probably have a strategy or solution that can help you, and you don't have to go through the process of trying to figure it out on your own. And so that's kind of how I equate it. Think about it as someone that's there to support you, someone that can help you. You'll realize once you reach out to help that the shame and stuff that you feel with reaching out is unwarranted. Like I have a lot of clients where they're like, "Oh, like this is not as bad as I thought it was going to be," and I'm like, "Yeah, no, I'm very laid back, down to earth." Sometimes you might get, and this goes back to the financial trauma piece as well. I think you have to realize who you need to reach out to, because not all people in the finance industry is the same. So, you might have certified financial planners, which are more about planning for the long term. You might have accredited financial counselors like me and Apprisen, where they can help you with short term planning, debt payoff, budgeting, things like that. You have people that sell insurance, so they're more interested in insurance, and so on and so forth. So, there's different types of financial professionals. And so, I would say, first step is to educate yourself on the different types and who you need to reach out to in your situation. Because another thing that I see happen is that people reach out to the wrong type of financial professional, and that person's not interested in working with them. And then it causes financial trauma because they're like, "Oh, well, I reached out for help, but they didn't want to work with me. I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough for this type of service." And so I would say that would be the first step to kind of avoid those situations as much as possible. And so you want to just think about all those different things when you're kind of evaluating who you want to work with. And then also inside of that too, not all financial planners and financial counselors are built the same either. You have to go with people that mesh. So I tell people to do interviews, do the consultations, see who you like, see who you mesh with, because that'll also make the journey a little easier. So credit counseling agencies. So as I was growing up, I mentioned that a lot of people dealt with foreclosures and bankruptcies. One thing that I do know is that some of them worked with credit counseling agencies. And the reason I like them, and the reason I'm even here, is because I believe in having these resources in our community, because I saw how it did help, those family members rebound a little faster. They're able to do things that I don't do. So, for instance, they can reach out to the credit card companies on your behalf and see if they can do some negotiation or get some things, in order for you. That's not something that I do. And so I feel like these agencies are very helpful whenever you're thinking about, credit cards, debt consolidation, things of that nature, because those are things that I really don't have a specialty in, or things that I do for people. So, um, also, I want to mention there's two flavors. There's nonprofits and there's for profits. And I'm all about a nonprofit credit counseling agency because they're on the same side of the table as you. And so when you think about that, if their goal is to really help the people and be in the community and things like that, they're not incentivized to stick you into a debt consolidation plan, so they can make a profit or what have you. They're really there to see where you are, how they can best help, whether that looks like, reaching out to the credit card companies or not, they'll help you make those decisions and they'll help you walk through that process. So I have seen credit counseling agencies really work for those people closest to me to help them rebound faster after the foreclosures and the bankruptcies and things like that. And also, I believe, if you have an extraordinary amount of debt, for instance, there's people that come to me with 6 figures worth of credit card debt. And honestly, that's something that most of the time can't help with. That's kind of above my expertise. And so having credit counseling agencies that deal with this on a regular basis, for me, having them as partners is really helpful because instead of me saying, oh, well, I can't help you, I can say, I can give you another resource that would better fit your situation. And so people don't have to deal with that financial trauma either. So I feel like all financial counselors and financial planners need to have credit counseling agencies as partners because if they do encounter people that reach out to them with those types of situations that they can't help with, they have a resource instead of just turning them away.
We love being a partner with you. And we also, the goal is just finding a solution, right? So we've all got to work together in that space. We talked a lot about the debt repayment strategies that you use, but then is there a moment or an indicator for when the debt might be too much for someone to handle on their own with a snowball or avalanche, or kind of how do you think about that? And what do you do when that seems like maybe those self-repayment strategies aren't going to work for a client?
Yeah. So, like I said before, when you get all your numbers out there and you start constructing your budget and you realize that, oh my gosh, I'm in the negative every month. If you're in the negative every month, where is that extra money coming from? It's probably coming from credit cards. And so you're in this kind of snowball effect with using credit cards. I feel like for me, that's a situation where you really need to reach out to someone like a credit counseling agency because they can help you potentially. Now, I know nothing is promised, but they could potentially help you get like lower interest rates or better payment plans or what have you. And so they can help you figure out that cash flow because there becomes a situation where if someone comes to me and it's truly, truly an income issue, or it's truly a situation where it's too much debt, and there's but so much I can do. Like I can coach you through maybe getting a side hustle or what have you. Sometimes I coach people through getting raises and asking for raises and things like that. But past that, like what else can I do? Like I'm not reaching out to the credit card companies and stuff. And so I feel like having that type of partner for you would be beneficial if you're in that situation.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, of course, there's no one size fits all. And, a debt management program doesn't work for everybody either. But I think it's important, yeah, if you're at that point to explore your options, right? Because what we don't want
Definitely.
is extreme reactions like going straight to bankruptcy or, you know, considering debt settlement when perhaps, you aren't at that level. Like in every industry, there are a lot of bad actors, in some of these financial spaces. And so
Mhm.
that's one of my key passions is just making sure that people use safe financial services. And so
Yes.
keep people in the safe spaces here. So
Yes, I love that. I love that you said that because I've had clients come to me and they're like, "Oh, I spoke with a bankruptcy attorney and they said I should just go ahead and file bankruptcy." And I'm like, "Well, wait a minute. You also have to think about what are the ulterior motives of people. Not saying that they had one, but if you file for bankruptcy, then they're going to get paid." So, you kind of have to think through that as well. Like, are these people really going to help you? And I like how you said safe spaces for people to deal with their finance, safe options, because there's always bad actors everywhere, and that is one of my gripes with the financial industry is that it's not really that regulated. So anybody could put a shingle up and say that they're a financial advisor or what have you, or financial coach, and sometimes they do more harm than good. So I like that, we're here to actually help people and point them in the right direction.
a call back to always read your reviews, do your research, find organizations that you connect with and trust. So, oh, well, Tiffany, it's been so wonderful spending this time with you today. I feel like our financial philosophies really align. So it's been
Mhm.
so great having this conversation. We've talked about trends, where we're going in 2024, making a plan. We've talked about creating the spending plan, budgeting, debt repayment strategies, mental and emotional impacts of finances, the role of credit counseling agencies. I think we've covered a lot.
We covered a ton. Goal setting,
Goal
we've
setting.
covered
Yeah, I can't even remember them
affirmations.
all.
We covered goals.
Affirmation. I
Yeah,
am excited.
affirmation.
I am happy about this conversation.
Right. We've covered just so much the gamut. Like this was truly a packed episode. And so I encourage people to go back, rewind, catch
Mhm.
all of the gems that we both spilled because it was just a phenomenal time for sure.
Yes, yes. Awesome. Well, I hope that for everyone who's listening, this helps you as you're starting to create your goals, your vision for 2024, for your finances, for your life. Obviously, if we can be of any help, Tiffany and I are both here. Shoot us a message, send us a DM, let us know what you thought about the conversation. We'd also love to hear your ideas as you hear what we're talking about. How does that resonate with you? What other tips and tools and strategies can you share so that we can all keep learning together? So yeah, as we end, we'll just say, let's all take down debt in 2024 and let's keep this conversation going. Yes, love it.
For
uh,
sure.
it's been great, Tiffany. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all soon.
All right. Thank you, Tasha. Bye.
Uh-huh.